Kunkel was cursed with a special gift. He could absorb punches and never go down. Young Ironsides, the Marines called him, and Boilerplate, and Kid Granite Jaw. Then the inevitable happened. Wally took on an opponent 30 pounds heavier than himself. He showed the courage of a little bull, but absorbed a fearsome beating. Corporal O'Hara pleaded for him to throw in the towel when a sudden change of fortune occurred. Wally's opponent became so exhausted that he could no longer lift his arms or catch his breath, and that was that. After laying out the bully boy, Wally collapsed. Corporal O'Hara lifted Wally in his arms and carried him back to the barrack and declared his boxing career over. When the juvenile constable came looking, Wally was kept hidden, and the Marines advised the constable not to come looking again. Well, they had pet dogs and such, but Wally presented a different problem. Fortunately, the platoon commander, Lieutenant Merriman, was a right fair guy, and noting the men's affection for Wally, had some documents fixed up to state that Wally Kunkel was actually 16 years of age, and he was sworn in as a Marine. At 13, he became a Marine drummer boy. By 1860, 11 Southern states had formed a coalition to preserve the institution of slavery and threatened to secede from the United States if Mr. Lincoln was elected president. In November, Abraham Lincoln won. Southern states called up their militias. Southern-born officers resigned from the Army and headed home to organize the Rebels' Army. Wally Kunkel's platoon, designated as the 1st Philadelphia Marines, was ordered from the Navy Yard and boarded a troop train that swept down from Boston and New York. The train was met at each stop by dignitaries on stands covered with bunting, and bands hustling up profound patriotic music and cheering citizens. The Confederacy demanded that the federal fort guarding Charleston Harbor be evacuated. When Lincoln refused, Fort Sumter was shelled and captured. The zealots in the North demanded quick and decisive punitive action. This brazen Confederate act, they said, was no more than a dare. Quick victory was the demand. Soon, two poorly trained forces were moving toward each other, but the Confederate states, knowing the fight would come, had a more skilled officer corps. Nevertheless, Washington was in a state of celebration. Everyone knew exactly where the battle would take place. The newspapers printed maps of the coming battlefield. Congressmen, civil servants, and civilians from the capital packed picnic lunches and took to the turnpike, already clogged with troops marching to the front. 30 miles from Washington and 100 miles north of Richmond, sitting in a gap of a northern Virginia mountain range, sat the town of Manassas, unexceptional except for the rail junction that went off in all 4 directions. For the Union forces to capture the Manassas Gap meant splitting the Confederate forces in half and opening the gates to Richmond. On rolling hills overlooking Manassas, thousands of spectators from Washington spread their picnic lunches and cheered their lads moving down into the fray. The 1st Philadelphia Marines was led by Lieutenant Merriman, who kissed his wife and daughters as he marched past. The Army's guns moved on horse-drawn caissons, and Kunkel had to beat quick time to keep up with them. At a creek named Bull Run on Jerome House Hill, they set up near a stone bridge. The plan was to cross Bull Run, secure the bridge, and bring the artillery over. The guns in picket line around Jerome House Hill seemed in right fair position overlooking the creek. Behind them, the 1st Philadelphia could hear hurrahs echoing from the onlookers. Hurrah! Hurrah! Echoed up the valley and the gap. Hurrah! Hurrah! Master Gunnery Sergeant Kunkel's reverie faded to a wisp. "It's early yet," Innkeeper Pritchard said, preparing the tables for evening drinks and fare. "Your mates will be along." The gunny nodded in thanks for the ale. "A reunion? Celebration?" Mr. Pritchard pressed. "Bull Run," Kunkel grunted. Bull Run, indeed. I was just 10 years old. This was my old man's place then. I see you've known glory. If Bull Run be glory, then fuck glory. As Wally Kunkel drummed the 1st Philadelphia onto Jerome House Hill, they could hear the popping of musket fire. Lieutenant Merriman set up a defensive picket line peering down at the creek and stone bridge as the Army artillery set up a battery of cannons. If the Rebs showed up and made an attempt to cross, the 1st Philadelphia would repulse them, rise and lead the Marine battalion over the bridge, secure it, get the artillery across, and help open the road to Richmond. That was the plan. Bursts of rebel cannon stepped up to the creek, then up the hillock to Jerome House. The Federal artillery responded, and the bright day turned an instant gray, and the air shrieked with shells going out and shells coming in. The sound became unbearable despite the wads of cotton stuffed in the soldiers' ears. The Confederates were on target first with a violent shaking of the earth. Wally Kunkel was struck by a flying object that smashed him to the ground and sent him crawling on all fours in search of his drum. He screamed as he saw the missile that had struck him was Lieutenant Merriman's leg. It shocked him from his fear as he crawled to the officer, took off Merriman's belt, and made a tourniquet on his stump. Corporal Paddy O'Hara knelt beside them and stared at the sheet-white, fast-dying officer. "Can you hear me, sir?" "Aye," Merriman croaked. "They got 2 of the cannons and the artillery officer. We've lost both sergeants." Another burst, and Wally and Paddy threw themselves atop the lieutenant. "Shit, man!" Paddy yelled. "Some of our people are breaking rank." Merriman gasped out, "We're on the far flank, O'Hara. We have to hold or they can break through to the turnpike." Then he said no more. "I need an officer," Paddy yelled, looked around, saw no one. "Boilerplate, I'm it. Can you get useful?" "Aye. "All right now. Crawl about, keep low. Pick up every musket and powder horn you can find, and carry them to the big boulder behind the tree. Go!" Paddy took command, shoring up his picket line. There were plenty of guns to be found because, to his horror, he had seen the Union troops scatter and throw down their muskets. A cannonade blast fell and choking smoke blotted out the hill. When it passed over, most of the Marines were in flight. Paddy took Lieutenant Merriman's saber, got behind the 1st Philadelphia, and threatened them to stand fast. Rebel cannon hit close again, and Wally Kunkel saw his arm go bloody from a shock of concussion. He was frozen with fear. He felt thirst, eyes stinging, unable to see more than blobs. And it was the toil of battle, and it was Paddy O'Hara keeping the Marines on the line. And now it all went ethereal. He was an angel looking down, watching himself move through time and space. The Marine line held a good position, looking down the knoll from Jerome House to Bull Run Creek and a hill beyond it. The crest of that hill soon filled with enemy, artillery gone, Marine battalion broken, one choice only. Muskets were of short range, so Paddy would have to let the rebels cross and come up the knoll to within 60 or 70 yards. It would take a steady hand. The cannon fire stopped, and Johnny Rebel let out terrifying screams as they poured down and over Bull Run Creek, certain that their artillery had cleared out Jerome House. Capture, consolidate, then organize a breakthrough to the turnpike itself. The rebel yell became a single earth and sky shattering scream. "Fire!" Remnants of the 1st Philadelphia held off the first charge and took up new loaded muskets. From the slope, some of the Confederate wounded crawled forward and picked off 2 Marines, 3. Another wave of rebels charged and were again beaten back, and now another, but they were coming with less determination. Paddy's line became thinned out pitifully when a breakthrough came. The strength of the 1st Philadelphia's numbers had